Hi there Internet, this is Caden, and I'm back as promised with a video that hopefully makes more sense than the last one. Yeah. So I wanted to make this video in response to the staggering amount of questions that I get and misuse that I hear of terms associated with trans people, pretty much on a daily basis. And I've explained these terms and I've spoken about these terms and everything, so I was hoping to maybe clear up some more of that confusion. Maybe. Today I'm going to be using a packet entitled Trans Ally Training, and so it's all about being an ally to trans people. There's a glossary in there and everything. So what I'm going to do is, with each term, I'm going to read the little textbook definition from my little glossary, and I'm going to be stealing a couple from other places too. And then I will talk about how I interpret the term, or how I have heard the term being used or misused in my life. Yeah. And as a disclaimer, I'm not claiming to be the golden prophet on any type of terminology. There's pretty much no right definition for any term. It's not like all us queer folk just get together and decide what each term means, every year or something. So you will hear differences, you will hear different interpretations. I am not necessarily right, I'm just telling you what each term means to me and to a lot of other people that I've heard it from. Alright, so let's get started. Woo! The first word that I'd like to discuss is a word that I use very, very liberally, and that is queer. And I am going to read a definition first from Wikipedia. And it says, queer is an umbrella term for sexual minorities that are not heterosexual, heteronormative, or gender binary. In the context of Western identity politics, the term also acts as a label setting queer identifying people apart from discourse, ideologies, and lifestyles that typify mainstream LGBT communities as being oppressive or assimilationist. As many of us know, the term queer used to be thought of as a negative term, and it's been reclaimed and reappropriated. And a lot of times you just hear people use the term queer as an umbrella term for the LGBTQIA alphabet soup community. Because it's much less of a mouthful than saying LGBTQIAP. Yeah, and it's also much easier to be inclusive that way. To me, that pretty much is how I generally use queer. I like it because it's very inclusive, and it also doesn't tie me down to a specific word. And I think that queer is also kind of a set of ideologies and beliefs and politics, if you will. As I've said in some other videos, I believe that using the term queer denotes a kind of younger generation of a little bit more kind of radical leaning, activisty type folk. Alright, now the next one is sex versus gender. Alright, sex. A biological term dividing a species into male and female, usually on the basis of sex chromosomes, hormone levels, secondary sex characteristics, and internal and external genitalia. And then gender, a binary sociological construct defining the collection of characteristics that are culturally associated with maleness or femaleness. Gender is to masculine and feminine as sex is to male and female. To put it in a very, very small nutshell, sex is what is between your legs, and gender is what is between your ears. Gender is societally constructed. Gender says these traits are masculine and these traits are feminine, whereas sex is purely biological. And the next one is transgender, or trans for short. An umbrella term for those individuals whose gender identity does not match with that assigned of their physical sex. Transgender people may identify as straight, gay, bisexual, any other sexual orientation. Transgender is different from sexual orientation, and it basically means that your gender identity does not match your physical sex. And there are many different ways to be trans. That's why it is an umbrella. And so the next thing is, a lot of people tend to confuse the word transgender with the word transsexual. Because I think that people who don't understand the difference between sex and gender think of gender as a more kind of PC term for sex, when actually they're two different things. And so therefore they mix up transgender and transsexual. And now I'll talk about what transsexual is. Transsexual. Medical term referring to a person whose gender identity differs from what is culturally assigned from their biological sex at birth. Some choose to undergo sexual reassignment surgery. So I will talk about both of those in tandem with each other. I usually use transgender just to refer to anyone who's under that trans umbrella, and that includes transsexual people, that includes genderqueer people, cross-dressers, two-spirit people, drag performers, anyone who is outside of the culturally defined male-female norms. Whereas transsexual is much more specific. My little thingy definition there just says that it's someone whose gender differs from their sex, which sounds a lot like transgender. But I tend to think of transsexual, and a lot of other people think of transsexual, as a term that denotes a more binary identified person. So someone who, say, was assigned male at birth, but has a gender identity that is pretty strongly female, and they want to live and be seen as a female, and then they want to make their body as close to female as possible. Some people define transsexual specifically as someone who has made some sort of medical transition via hormones or surgery, and other people define transsexual as people who have had all of the possible medical transitions. So it's definitely more binary identified. It's less flexible than the word transgender. And I would like to talk about a little bit about the use of these words, mainly their parts of speech. Most commonly, what I have found is that transgender is solely used as an adjective, whereas transsexual can be used as an adjective or a noun. So it is incorrect to say, oh, I met a transgender the other day, or I met a trans the other day. I hear those and it drives me up a wall. And you will hear people use transgender as a noun, but I think the reason a lot of people object to that, and the reason I object to it, is because using it as a noun makes it sound like transgender is the soul of your identity. That's all you are. I am a transgender. End of story. But if you use it as an adjective, it becomes much more humanizing. It becomes just a part of you. It becomes a facet of you, but it does not encompass you. You can make the same argument for a transsexual, but you hear a lot of people say, oh, transsexuals do this, or I met a transsexual the other day. It's generally used as a noun, or an adjective, transsexual people. So I'm not sure why there's that difference there, but that's how I hear it a lot. Okay, genderqueer. A gender identity that rejects the notion that all genders can be described on the masculine-feminine binary. There's a lot of wiggle room there, as with a lot of these terms, and I hear people use genderqueer in a lot of different ways, and it means different things to different people. But for me, I think that genderqueer can be both an ideology, like kind of as it talks about there, like rejecting the notion that gender can be simplified into just male and female, but also an identity. So it can describe someone who feels that their gender lies outside the binary of masculine and feminine, and that is, they don't think that their gender can be, graphed on a spectrum, with masculine being at one side and feminine being on the other, and identify as genderqueer. But I have met genderqueer people who identify with gender-neutral pronouns, or who identify with one or the other pronoun. But you just have to ask the person what they feel most comfortable being addressed as. Crossdresser. Individual who dresses in the clothing usually associated with another gender for a variety of reasons, sometimes for sexual pleasure. Cross-dressing is not indicative of sexual orientation. The term transvestite is often seen as pejorative. That definition isn't fantastic. While some people cross-dress for some sort of sexual reason, many other people do not. People have as many reasons for being cross-dressers as I have hairs on my head. So, yeah, again, you just have to ask them how they feel most comfortable being identified and being seen and all that stuff. Yay.